Welcome to Ledge Reps, the December 2023 Ledge Reps, our last Ledge Rep Network meeting prior to the legislative session kicking off on January 8th. I'm going to let Mike go ahead and introduce himself, and then while you're doing that, Mike, I'll pull up the PowerPoint presentation so you can jump right in.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Some of you I've met before, perhaps some I haven't. I'm Mike Hoover, your consultant advocate, and I have been doing this a long time. I was thinking about that. Going on 30 years in the legislative environment, if you add it all up. And before that, I was an attorney in private practice. And before that, I don't know what I was. I was at Carl's Jr. for a while, and I like to keep that in my back pocket in case things kind of go sideways. But anyways, Marissa said this would be amazing. I don't know, folks. We will see. We will see how amazing it is. It is going to be an overview. It will be a refresher for some of you. It will be new to others. There was a Speaker of the House, and I mean the U.S. House in this case, called Thomas Reed, and it goes back to the 19th century, that when he was putting together a compendium of all these rules, he was criticized for making it too simple in some cases. And his response was that basically anybody that wanted to be effective needed it to be simple, and the rest of the folks weren't going to get it anyway, so it didn't matter. It was kind of a little more acerbic than I just made it out to be, but it was basically how they called each other out in the 19th century. Okay, so we can probably skip this one and go right to the first slide, if you would, please, Marissa. And I have this one here because some of the stuff that I will talk about is somewhat complicated. The process is complicated. The rules are complicated. The whole rule book, I'll actually show it to you, looks like this with tiny print and all kinds of stuff in it, including the Territorial Act and all these things. You do not need to know that. It is actually fairly simple, folks. It really is. Nobody believes me on this. I tell this to interns starting out. I tell this to attorneys that I do CLEs on. It is really simple. I would like it to be more complicated so that it would help me with my billing opportunities, but it's really not. It's actually very straightforward. The process is mostly linear, and it mostly happens the same way again and again. If you want to follow a bill, oops, I think we got ahead. If you want to follow a bill, if you only hear one thing I say tonight, I hope it's this. Well, I guess it's three things. Following a bill, all you got to know is what is the number, where is it now, and where is it going? That's really it. The rest is details. They're important details, but that's it. What am I following? Where is it now? Where do I need to go next? How do I influence that? Again, straightforward, very simple, 3 steps. What's the outcome I want? Who can help with that outcome? And how do I persuade the person, those people, to get to that outcome? Or who do I need to talk to? That's really it. The rest is details. There's important stuff. We're going to go over some of the key points of it here. And but if you're working on a legislative process and you find yourself getting overwhelmed, please just take a step back and remember that you probably do not need that level of detail. Okay. I will also point out that our system of government was founded by people that were suspicious of government. So if you're ever reading anything and going, this is unnecessarily complicated, my response to that is, yes, it is. And that is on purpose, because they had fought a war to get away from a king that they thought taxed them without representation and all of that kind of stuff. You remember all of that? Well, you don't remember it, but you probably heard about it. That was a long time ago, but that was who founded our system of government at the federal level. Everything had to be go through multiple steps, 2 chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate. When the states started making our legislatures locally, they copied it from the feds. And when Washington became a state later, we copied it from other states. So it all goes back to, believe it or not, those revolutionary times, the first Continental Congress, the first, everything from the Articles of Confederacy to all the way back to the Constitution itself. But we're not going to get into all of that. We're just going to keep it simple. But that is why there are so many steps. And what are those steps? Maybe we can go to the next slide now, please. I really tried to get this. I don't know why these aren't all coming up, but in any case, what do we need to do to make them come up? There we go. I really tried to get this down to 10 steps because everything listed is supposed to be 10. There's always a top 10. Other than Spinal Tap, nothing goes to 11, but these do because I just can't get it down to 11. I've tried. This is it, folks. If you keep a hold of this slide and you realize, and you ever wondering where you are in the process, these are pretty much the entirety. This is pretty much the entirety of the whole process. It's still a lot, but it's better than a book of steps. And I'm going to make it even simpler if we can go to the next slide. Because really, I think this is all you need. This is a simplified bill process, but I think it gets at what you need. Every single bill starts out filed. They all start in the same position. They start out filed somewhere, and then they need to go to committee. Where we're at now, bills can actually be pre-filed, so they are ready to go in January. In fact, bills are already being pre-filed. They're there. If you want to go look online, you can find them, and you can see what folks are thinking of for next year. Is it all of the bills? No, because first off, all the bills from last year, which if you can believe it is still this year, they're all still alive at some point if they didn't pass. So we already start with all of those. These are the new ones that members are dropping early for consideration next year, and they will continue to drop bills, between now and all the way probably even into February. Now, the main bills, the things that are probably going to be seriously considered, they mostly have to be in by December, January. So if you don't see it more or less in January, it probably isn't going to be filed. I say that because we're going on to the short session. We're going into the 60-day session. The long session and the short session make up a biennium. We had the 105-day session, that was this year, and then everything is carried over into the next year, which is only 60 days. 60 days seems really short. Don't worry, they will make it seem longer, but 60 days does make things happen very quickly. And everything alive this year is still alive next year, which is in just a few short weeks. It will all come magically back alive. So if you were following a bill last year and it didn't make it, if you love it, I got good news. It's still alive. If you hate it, I got bad news. It's still alive. It doesn't have to necessarily go through the entire process all over again, but it goes back to the chamber it came from, and it stays there until they decide what to do with it. And it's all back alive. If you loved it, we got to testify again. If you hated it, we got to push on it again, whatever we need to do. But pre-filing is happening now. All the bills are still alive. Any new bill that's filed, including a pre-filed bill, will come out in the evening. You can see it. You don't necessarily have to look so frequently this time of year, but probably if you're interested or looking for a particular bill, if you were to look every couple of days online this time of year, you can get a pretty good sense of what's coming. When session is ongoing and you're interested in something, if you have a job like mine or Marissa's, you need to check every day. They come out at night. They always come out at an inconvenient time. They never come out at 5. They rarely, well, it's not never. They rarely come out at 6. Sometimes they don't come out till 10 or 11 at night. And just because, who knows, right? But so you got to check them every day, though, to see what's coming. And those are the bills that even though they come out in the evening, they're technically filed the next day. So bills get introduced. That's the first step. The next thing that happens is they go to a policy committee. I wrote always, because how often do they go to a policy committee? Say it with me. Always. They always go to a policy committee. How do I know that? Because it's in the rules. The rule says it has to go to a policy committee. So education bills go to education, sort of makes sense. Transportation bills go to transportation, etc. Once in a while, a bill really doesn't have a lot of policy and it's just a fiscal bill, like something that raises taxes, for example, that may go to a fiscal committee, which just doubles as a policy committee in that instance. So to keep it simple, though, everything goes to a policy committee. And after it gets out of that, if it gets out of that, and many things do not get out of that, it goes to a fiscal committee. It goes to Ways and Means or Appropriations if it costs money. What costs money in the state of Washington? Short answer, just about everything. We can't even name the state dinosaur something without it costing money. Now, whether that's a good thing, a bad thing, or whatever, I don't know. But just about everything will do these two things. It will go to a policy committee, and then it will go to a fiscal committee. And you may be sitting there thinking, Mike, that's really stupid. Why don't they just combine them? Well, that's a good idea. But the plan is the education people, for example, in an education bill, they're the experts on that, and they will look at what the policy is, and then it will go to see if we can afford it. And the idea is that an entirely separate group of people should look at it fiscally so that the education people, for example, don't just vote through everything they want and affect the budget. Because it's not even just the education budget, it's all the committees. The agricultural committee is doing this, the labor committee is doing this. As you can imagine, everybody just passing on fiscal costs without anybody keeping track of it, that could be a problem. Even if you liked it, that could be a problem. So the idea is all these things will get the policy assessed, then they'll go to the fiscal committee, and the fiscal committee will say, okay, whether this is a good idea or not, can we afford it, and how much are we going to spend on it, and how? And that's what that that's what that step is. And then after that, it goes to the rules committee. And the rules committee is one of those things that is not named like how a normal person will name anything. And you will find that throughout the legislative process. We do not call everything what we should call it. For example, a calendar in the legislature means a calendar of days, just like a normal person would think, unless it doesn't mean that, unless it means a list of bills. And we call sometimes a list of bills a calendar too. Don't mean to confuse you with that, just giving an example of how they don't call everything what it is. Same with the rules committee. You would think the rules committee deals with the rules. They don't. They don't ever deal with any rules. All they are is the final step a bill goes through when it's been introduced, it's been passed out of a policy committee, it's been passed out of a fiscal committee, meaning we love the policy, we are willing to pay for it. Now it goes to the rules committee, and the rules committee tends to be the leadership of the House or the Senate. And they are looking at it usually with fresh eyes. They may have never seen this bill before. And they're supposed to be tracking all of the bills and deciding, okay, of all the things that came out of the fiscal committees and the policy committees, what do we for real want to hit the floor? Because there is limited time. For example, how many days do we have coming up? Only 60. Only 60, and we're not going to be on the floor all of those days. So even if you loved every idea, sheer math would, I'll just tell you, they're not very good at that, but even they recognize that sheer math says there is not enough time to hear everything that comes out of committee. So rules is supposed to take a look at this and be the gatekeeper of what goes to the floor and what doesn't. But if you make it out of rules, then it goes to the floor for a full vote of the House, a full vote of the Senate, depending where it started. And if it makes it out of there, you know what happens next? You get to do it all over again. I hope you liked it, because you get to do it all over again. All the Senate bills go to the House. All the House bills go to the Senate. They start over. They start in a policy committee. They go to a fiscal committee. They go to rules. They go to the floor. It's these same things over and over. Yes, I see at least one hand raised.
That's me. Point of privilege. I just wanted to ask here while you're addressing this, because it might come up. If a bill was introduced last session in the House, it went through the policy and the fiscal and made it off the floor and made it over to the Senate. Let's say it made it past the policy committee, but didn't get to the fiscal on the opposite side. Where does it start this year?
That is a good question. And the answer is, you're going to hate the answer. The answer is it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends on who wants what. It does not necessarily have to go back to a policy committee, but that is often the easiest place to amend it. Frequently, if it didn't make it out of a committee or a chamber in the first year, it's could be a number of reasons. One is they ran out of time. That's a very common one. But why did they run out of time? Is it because they couldn't get agreement among all the stakeholders, all the politicians? Could they just not get agreement? If that's the case, then to get agreement, they probably have to change the bill, right? And the easiest place to do that is still probably a committee. So it may actually go back to committee so that they can work on it, have another hearing, and slap new language on it, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Or it may be that it doesn't need that. If it really just ran out of time, and that does happen, everybody was agreed. Everybody that worked on it is in agreement. It doesn't need any change necessarily. It can just stay in rules. It will go to the fiscal committee, whatever the highest position it reached, it will go to. With the exception of if a bill, sorry, I'm probably making this really complicated. If a bill was a House bill and it went over to the Senate, it doesn't stay in the Senate, it goes back to the House, and vice versa. But they go back to their highest position in their chamber of origin. So it goes back to the highest point it reached in the House. The Senate bill goes back to the highest point it reached in the Senate. And then the powers that be make the determination I was saying, like, hey, do we want to just run this over to the Senate again, or do we want to run it back to committee because it's easier to slap a new amendment on it there? What do we want to do? And that's pretty much a political decision more than a rules sort of decision. Okay, the next slide, which I will not spend a lot of time on, is timelines. Not only do you have to do all those things, those 3 things, or 11, if you prefer the 11, whichever, if you have to do all those things by a certain time, a certain timeline. Where do we get these timelines? Well, they are in the Constitution, they are in the rules of the House and the Senate, or they are in a concurrent resolution, an agreed upon timeline, a deadline that they adopt for themselves to move bills. You know this from your own work. We certainly know this from schools. I know it from when I was back in school. If you gave me 6 weeks or 2 days, we all know I was writing the same book report. And we all knew that if you didn't give me a deadline at all, I was never turning it in. We would still be waiting on that Hardy Boys thing, and nobody would ever know what I thought of it. And that would be a tragedy. This is how the legislature is too. You have timelines to keep things moving. And you look over on the left-hand side here, this is from 2023. We actually have a draft one for 2024. I just didn't put it in time because it only just came out. But it is only a draft. And this is the days by which all of those 11 steps, or the 3 steps if you prefer, this is when they have to happen by. So that and this is a very key thing, because this is the main way that a bill dies. Bills do not die a fiery death with fiery speeches. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington has misled you, unless you didn't see it, in which case you're fine. But in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he turns the tide, and there's these big debates, and a lot of TV shows go on about this too, and where they have a lot of drama and surprises and things. That is not usually how it goes down in the legislature. A bill dies by simply nothing happening to it, or nothing happening by the right timeline. It doesn't make it out of the policy committee in time. It doesn't make it out of the fiscal committee in time. It doesn't make it off the floor in time. This is basically the main way that bills are killed. On purpose, by accident, whatever the case, this is how it happens. They just didn't make it in time. And that's why I put in the bottom corner, time kills bills, because it's true. That is really how it is. Far more than fiery floor speeches. It's simply the passage of time and the non-occurrence of some key event. The next slide. I put this in because it's kind of, it's one of those things where, maybe not for you folks, but I get asked this question the most, because amendments and the way we amend bills tend to confuse folks. And if you have ever looked online, and I could talk forever on this, don't worry, I won't. But if you go look at a legislative document online, you may often see a whole ton of documents. You see the bill, how it was introduced, then you may see a substitute, then you may see a floor amendment, a committee amendment, a line amendment, a page and line, a striking amendment. I mean, these terms, they just go on and on and on, and they are confusing. They are very confusing. So to cut through it all, what I would suggest to you, I know what they mean because I'm essentially paid to know what they mean. You don't necessarily have to know what they mean. What they are is ways that you change a bill. That's it. Every amendment is more or less the same. These are details as to form and time, but every amendment is just, we made a change to the bill. That's it. And the way that we do it, I'll go to the next slide, because I said I didn't want to spend forever on this, and I don't, but I wanted to at least go over and give you a couple examples. These are the most common ways we change a bill. These are the most common terms you will hear, and they are all the same thing. They are all pretty much the same thing. They are not identically the same thing, but they are more or less the same thing. They're almost like if you go to a restaurant and you change your mind after you put your order in. You decide you don't want the salad at all, versus you decide you still want the salad, but you want different dressing, versus you decide I still want the dressing, but I maybe want it on the side. Those are all kind of different things, but it's really the same, isn't it? You're just changing your order. And it just depends at what you decided to do and where you caught the wait staff in that process. And unless, of course, you're too late, in which case, you can't do it. But that's what all of these are. They're these terms that you're seeing on your screen right here. A striking amendment is just like it sounds when you hear that term. Strike everything and put new stuff on. That's it. Strike it all and put new stuff on. Why would they do that? Don't everybody speak at once. That's okay. I'll actually come back to that, because if you go down and you see one that says a line and page or a section amendment, just makes one specific change. So let me ask the question going back to a striker a different way. Let's say you had a bill that was dealing with hybrid buses, for example, electric buses, let's say, for transit districts or school buses, if you prefer.
This is the
And,
rug.
and then we decided that we wanted it not just to be electric buses, we were going to add the word hybrid in there, electric or hybrid. And this is just an example. I don't really think there's a bill exactly like this, although there's bills kind of like it going around. So we just are adding one line. It seems like if you were just adding one line, you would go to a line and page or section amendment because you're just doing one change. But more often than not, we strike the whole thing. The legislature, they strike the whole thing and they just put that change in, even though it's just one little change, they strike the whole bill and put it in there. Can you guess why they do that? And my example is probably not very good, but the reason is that usually there's more than one change, and it's for ease of reading. That's all it is. I don't have a line amendment here, but if I had a line amendment, it would say on page 6 at line 26, strike the comma and insert hybrid. That's all it would probably say in the example I gave you. And you can't tell what it does just from that. If that confuses you, it also confuses all the everybody else reading it. So it's simpler for them, since they have the power, to strike it all so you can see it all at once. That's the main reason they do that. And a substitute bill is the same thing. A substitute bill is just like it sounds. You're substituting the language for one bill with this new language. Just take it out, put the new one in. The difference between a striker and a substitute is only who's doing it and where it's happening. That's it. You don't necessarily need to worry about that. But all you need to know is what was changed in a bill for our purposes. And the usual way you can figure that out is very simple. It is by using what is the latest in time that was adopted. That's it. Who cares what they called it? What is the latest version? It will always be the one you don't have, by the way. And when did they adopt it? That's it. As long as you've got the latest version and you know it was adopted, or you know that they're looking to adopt it, you don't need to worry about what it's called. All this stuff, don't worry about it. It will get confusing. You will hear people use the terms, and I get asked about it all the time, so I threw it in here. I don't know if that made it worse. If it did, I'm sorry. But again, the fact that I'm trying to get at is, don't let it make it worse. Just go look at the latest thing that they're considering, and that's what you're working from, regardless of the title.
And I'll just add, if you don't know how to find that, or you're still wondering, that's what you got Mike and I for, is to help you navigate that. You don't have to memorize all of this to any extent. Let's say, Mike, that we've got a group of members or a school board. They like parts of a bill, but not other parts of a bill. How might they go about working with their own legislators to suggest an amendment? What would be a recommended practice? Let's just say they want to do it on their own and they're going to reach out directly to their legislator. What might that look like in a way that could be effective?
How to reach out to a legislator to get a change? Well, the first thing, the first thing I would point out too, because I want to let people know, a bill could be hundreds of pages long and it may only have one word changed, because legislature, in Washington, we require everybody to set forth everything in full. So if the existing law is really long, you have to include it all, even if your change is just one line. So what you're looking for first to find out if something's changed, because I find people get panicked about something that's existing law, frankly, and that's not what's being changed. You're looking for strike through and underline and new section. If it's not stricken through, and that will look like stricken through, or it's not underlined, or it's not language preceded by new section, it's already existing law. So those are really the only three things you have to look at. So when you want to work with a legislator, because you want something changed, give them the language. Give them at least pinpoint. If you don't have the solution of what you want, pinpoint the section for them that you want changed. That is so useful. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself from the slides, but one of the things I try not to do is give legislators homework. They don't like it. Kids don't like it. Legislators don't like it. They don't like homework. You have a much higher chance of success if you flag a problem and you come in with a solution. And if you can't come in with a solution, and you don't have to, because it's actually their job to to fix it. It's just, it'd be nice if you did have a solution, but at least point them to where it is. So go to that stricken language, go to that underlined language, go to that new section language, cut and paste it and put it right in your email or whatever you're doing, or bring a copy if you're meeting with them and say, hey, this is what we're worried about. It will go a long way towards getting what you want, frankly, other than saying, oh, now sometimes it is sufficient to say, I mean, you hate a whole bill, that's fine. I mean, that's okay. Then you don't have to go to that trouble. You say, we hate this bill. Probably don't say that, but you get what I mean. But if you just want a particular section deleted, changed, modified, get the section, get the change where you can, give them both to them. Your odds of success go way up.
Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. And I would just add, I think many of you know this already, but just to do my due diligence, that you can have whatever conversations, communication with your own legislators directly on behalf of your school board. But if you are speaking to a WSSDA position or an interest of WSSDA at large, please work through us before reaching directly out to your legislator and saying WSSDA wants blank. Let's just make sure we're following the right protocols there, because sometimes something that's good for one district may not be as good or good at all, or maybe even bad for another district. And as a statewide organization, we have to be sure that we're rising all boats when we support a bill or make suggested changes.
Okay. The next slide I'll go over really quickly. You all know this, but I always point it out to certain audiences. Don't go just by length. A very small, it could be that a stack of amendments could do very little. It could be all technical, whereas a one tiny amendment could make a big change. For example, changing all districts to no district, that would be a massive 180-degree change. So, pointing that out, that sometimes people think, oh, it's just a quick little amendment, I don't have to pay attention. Maybe not. Ironically, often some of the things that do the biggest changes are these little amendments as opposed to the big, huge technical amendments, at least in terms of volume. The next slide, a companion bill, if you've heard that term, that is just meaning that the same bill was introduced in the House and the Senate. And why would they do that? I don't know. Doubles your chances of getting heard. At some point, they need to pick one, and they usually do, and that's a political decision as much as anything, or it may be who got their bill out first. So in the beginning, you may have to follow two bills, one Senate version and one House version, that do the same thing, and you may be pulling your hair out and wondering why they do that. But eventually, it will consolidate, or they will coalesce. They will just pick one of them, and you'll just have to follow that one. But it's usually not that hard to follow the two because they're mostly the same.
One question before you move on? Actually,
yeah.
two. When we say companion bill, is that what it really means? Are they the exact same bill on both the House and the Senate side, or might they be a little bit different? And is that still a companion bill if they have some slight differences?
The lawyer in me will give you a technical answer, which everybody will hate. Technically, a companion bill must be identical. Now, I will bill you for that, by the way. But in practice, companion just means mostly kind of sort of the same.
Okay.
In common parlance.
So if an issue area has a companion on both sides, does that indicate that it's got more chance for success?
That is a tough question to answer. It could mean all kinds of things. On some level, it's better, I guess, that two people had the same idea or think it's a great idea. That part's good. It could be that two members cannot agree amongst themselves on who is going to get the glory for the bill, and that could be bad because they can't decide on one of them. But I'm trying not to be negative here. You can't read too much into it one way or the other. Although I would say, I mean, this gets into another issue, which is I can tell a lot about the bill by where it is and who the sponsor is. So if you have companion bills and they're both sponsored by the chair of education, I might humbly suggest you pay attention to those, because those have a pretty good shot of at least one of them getting out. So, but beyond that, I don't know that you can read too much into it. So I think there's at least one question.
Yeah, Sherry's got a question.
Hi. So when there is a companion bill, how does WSSDA handle that, or how do they choose? Or I'm assuming they'll be choosing one or the other to support. Or can you talk a little bit about WSSDA's strategy with that?
Sure. Our strategy, whether it's a bill just on one side of the House or Senate or it's on both, would be to compare it against our adopted permanent and legislative positions. So let's say there's a bill, an issue that's companion, that's got a companion on both sides, it's essentially the same, and we've got position proposals to support it. We would track both. Maybe they both end up in a hearing on the same day. We would provide similar messages, but maybe provide a little more specificity depending on the legislators who are in the dais. So if I've got a school director who is in the chair's legislative district on the House side, I might have a school director actually present the testimony on behalf of WSSDA on that side and may do something different. So there's some strategy that might be nuanced, but the messaging would be essentially the same if they are indeed the same-ish type of bill. And then we'd just track them as we go and take the similar approach as they move. And if we continue to be supportive despite amendments, we would just track the one all the way to the finish line. So there's oftentimes the response to a question like yours is it depends. So I'm speaking in generalities, but for the most part, we would follow a similar strategy as the bill progressed.
Yeah, this is the beginning. You got to do them both.
Yeah, got to do them both. Yeah.
Okay, I think the next slide is some fiscal stuff that I can go through pretty quickly. Things that confuse people are sometimes, perhaps not this group, is the difference between an appropriation and a fiscal note. An appropriation is actually state budget money, if any, that the legislature is directing towards it. It will appear in the budget or it may appear in the bill itself, but one way or another, it is actually a legal direction of money to something. A fiscal note is what an agency, and in some cases a local agency too, or local government, and even the business and private sector, what a bill might cost. What are its impacts? They are not the same thing. The one is actually the legislature giving money for something, and a fiscal note is we haven't decided if we're giving money or not, but we have asked agencies to tell us what they think it will cost to implement it. How much would it cost to add this new program that somebody wants? What are the impacts on it? So a lot of times the fiscal note dictates what the appropriation will be down the road if there is one, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. And I know this group is all sitting down, so that's good. You won't be shocked. Have you ever told them what a program will cost and they do not give you the entire amount? Happened to me. Happened to me. Yes. They do not necessarily make all of the decisions based on the actual costs that they are told. Math would say that you have to do that, but politics and math, they don't get along very well. In fact, they're rarely on speaking terms. Next slide is just a screenshot of what is of where you can find things online. If you didn't know, all of these things you can click on, and I actually have a whole presentation on this, and I don't know if it's good or bad or boring. I don't know what it is, but we could spend a lot of time on this. But this is what the landing page looks like if you want to go look for bills, and you can play around with this and find out all kinds of information. You can get on lists to be emailed, the agendas, you can do all sorts of stuff here. It's actually a very good website, and I'm pretty impressive, and they actually win they win awards nationally for it because they do a pretty good job with it. And if you don't believe me, go look something up in another state.
While you're on that topic, one of our members tonight asked a question about how to find bills that have been pre-filed. And so given this is a screenshot of the homepage linked up here, if you just go ledge.wa.gov, you can essentially navigate your way to a pre-filed bill. So if we have a little extra time, it'll be right here at the top. So hopefully that gets to that question.
Yep. And those pre-filed bills are listed chronologically. They're listed in what order they were dropped. So you have to kind of go through them. So not by topic or anything.
Right. But just so you all know, WSSDA staff does that on your behalf, and we review them every day and pull any of the new education related bills and put them on our bill watch. And I'll show you how to access that before we close out today in case you don't already know.
Okay. This next, in too busy of a slide, I am not following my own advice in making this slide, but that is okay. These are some tips on how to testify. By the way, you're all very capable people. So if anything I say is at odds with what you do, don't worry about it. Do you, you do you. It's worked for you so far. But these are some general things that I've observed from doing it and watching other people do it. The first one on the right hand side is how to testify. On the left hand, or excuse me, left hand side, and the right hand side is how I would suggest you not testify. The first thing is real simple: say who you are and say what your position is. Say what your position is. I am amazed how often people forget to do this. I think usually because they're nervous or because they want to get to their, they want to get to the meat of their presentation. And often people can infer it, but it would be good to say it right from the gate what it is you want. And along those same lines, what is the outcome you want? Do you want them to pass it? Do you want them to change it? Do you want them to not pass it? Where you can, say that. It's very useful. Don't leave it to chance. Don't make them infer that. The next one is be brief. You will be helped out by the chair on this because they do not give us a lot of time typically. It has actually gotten worse with the hybrid system where they're letting people testify online and in person. I'm a fan of that. I think that's actually good. I think it increases participation and all of that stuff is good, but they did not increase the time for testimony. So they instead, to accommodate all these new people testifying, they cut everybody down to a minute, 30 seconds sometimes. So you got to be brief. You got to have, if you're coming to testify, I would always have a longer version and a shorter version in case you have to cut it down on the go. I said earlier, I never give them homework if I can avoid it. In fact, I go the other way and I offer to help. So for example, if I were testifying and I had an issue, or I knew that somebody else had an issue, I would say, hey, my understanding is that some of our superintendents have an issue with this. I'm glad to work with them and see if we can't come up with something on this. That is actually a tactic that I use all the time. I know Marissa uses it all the time. Or we have some concerns about section 2. I have some language I'm happy to share with you and staff that I think alleviate all the problems. Anything you can do like that is very helpful. Offer to follow up afterwards individually, especially if somebody asks you a question and it's maybe a question that takes too much time. You can maybe give a quick answer and say, Senator, I'd be happy to meet with you about this afterwards. That is great one-on-one contact. It is a nice entree to get a meeting with them. So I always try to do that if you can. The other one is I try to interact with them. Some people might call this reading the room, see where, who's paying attention, who's not. If somebody's nodding along to what you're saying, that's always a good thing. It helps you realize who or recognize, I should say, who your allies are, who are some people you might need to go follow up with, who seem to be frowning when you were talking. I actually get that a lot, Marissa, not so much. So all of that kind of stuff is actually very useful to do. And for panels, if you're on a panel, and many of you may frequently be, if you can, it's good to coordinate in advance who's going to speak first, what you're going to say, that kind of thing. I'm not saying you have to run your testimony by each other, but at the same time, you don't necessarily all need to say the exact same thing. So the more you can coordinate, the better off you will be. How not to testify, in my opinion. Well, these are, again, all things I've seen, and in some cases I've done it myself, so I learned the hard way. Don't argue. There is no point to it. You will not win hearts and minds. Again, you will, this is not Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. If somebody's argumentative, just move on. That is not a person that you are going to win over, at least at that hearing. Maybe we can talk to them afterwards, but at least at that hearing. Be a diplomat. That's what you want to do. So I said don't read. If you are looking down, what I mostly mean by that is if you're looking down at the paper, you're not looking at the group. It's okay to have notes. It's actually okay to have everything written out if that's your style, but try to make some eye contact. Try to, practice in advance so your cadence, your diction, everything is good. So it doesn't quite sound like you're reading aloud. It's a little bit better of a delivery. People tend to zone out if they think you're just reading from a passage or something. For panels, I say overlap and emphasis is okay. Direct repetition, that's something you want to try to avoid. Don't argue and don't be hostile kind of go together. They're a little different. Argue, you could be going along fine and somebody wants to argue with you and you have to avoid that. Hostility is what I'm asking you not to bring into the room, even if you hate a bill. You want to try not to be hostile to anybody talking. I think you already all know this. You all are professionals. You all have offices where, you know, you conduct yourselves accordingly, et cetera. But I mention it because this can be a very tense place. Olympia can be a very tense place. So keep it in the back of your mind. Keep everything from being personal. And the final thing I think is actually a big one. I say don't avoid the question. Other people have different views on this. Some people think it's the height of good testimony. If somebody asks you a question, you can dance around it. Okay, maybe. I prefer to answer it directly as much as I can. Members, legislators, I mean, seem to appreciate that. And here's something you'll hear me say a lot if you watch me testify, and it is this: I don't know. If you don't know, say it. But I don't just say I don't know. I say I'm happy to get back to you on that, because you can't know everything. You can't know, what they're going to ask. Sometimes a question comes out of left field. I was working on a transportation bill years ago, and somebody asked me a question, and I'm not kidding, about how fish tranquilizer might impact the bill. Surprisingly, I did not know the answer to that. Came from left field, but I found out the answer, and I can get with you later if you want to know. So, that's what we try to do, because I try to view that as I didn't know, but now I've got an opportunity to interact with that person again and follow up, and that's a good thing. So, and if there's something that you do know and it's bad for our position, I would still mention it. I would still, I get asked that all the time. It's like, well, Mr. Hoover, this, that, and the other thing, isn't that bad for what isn't that the exact opposite of what you said last year? Yes, it is. However, or whatever you can do to differentiate. I like to meet any weakness we have head on and then explain why I think it's not this positive. Explain why that's a good point, but I have a better one. Yes, we were talking about electric buses 10 years ago. The technology's changed, and now I'm talking about hybrid buses or whatever you may be saying. So I think, don't worry, we're getting to the end. We're almost there, in fact. How do I reach people? This is very easy. You can ask us, and we will try to reach people for you. You cannot reach everybody. I will say that again. You cannot reach everybody. So, Mike, how are you effective? Well, I use something I call the multiplier effect. I reach people that will reach other people to the extent I can. No matter who you are, no matter how good you are, you will not be in every meeting. It is not possible. So what I try to do is figure out who will be at meetings I'm not at, and it would be great if I had talked to them and they can speak for me when they're there. They don't have to be an expert on it. They just need to be there and go, oh, I remember Marissa said something about this, and what I think she said is that WSSDA was going to have language on this. That kind of thing is perfect. That's exactly what you want to do. How do you contact them? To the extent you can at your level, I suggest by phone or in person if you can. I am not such a fan of email. We all do email because it's easy, which is why I disfavor it. If you can have that one-on-one contact with them by phone, please do it. If you're saying to me, but Mike, I don't know them and email is the only way I can do it, okay, do email in that circumstance, because some contact is better than no contact, because no contact is not good. No, you want to reach out some way, somehow. If you do email people and you're emailing a bunch, even though it's a pain, please do them individually. Members and legislators tend to discount group emails. Everybody just assumes, oh, that's for somebody else. I don't need to pay attention. One-on-one, even if you have to do it 49 times in the Senate and 98 in the House. Once in a while, I have to do that. So the more you can do that one-on-one contact, the better off you will be. And I think we're actually pretty much done, Marissa. I have this slide mostly because I like it. The enemy of the good can be the perfect at times. You've heard that saying. I just probably butchered it. But anyways, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We work in a place where this happens all the time. We will be faced with that this year again and again. At what point is an idea we had something we don't recognize anymore because they've amended it so much and we want to abandon it? Or at what point is half a loaf better than no loaf? That's pretty much the kind of thing we're going to be faced with. And if I had to guess, we're going to be faced with it a lot this coming year. We will have our priorities. We do have our priorities. The legislature will probably say, I like your priorities, but I'm only going to do this, or I'm only going to give you that. And we will have to make tough decisions. And we is you, by the way, it's not me. So, but there will be tough decisions coming. So that's where the balancing act comes in. You're always at every level, all my clients, myself, all the decisions, you're always balancing this. So there you go.
Thanks, Mike. One more question, and then while I'm asking this question of Mike, please be thinking if there's anything else you'd like to know before we close out for tonight, besides me showing you a couple ways for you to stay in the loop during ledge session. So I understand that the governor's proposed budget is coming out this Wednesday, and
Like
we
1
will
o'clock
certainly share that.
supposedly.
What's that?
Approximately 1 o'clock,
At
supposedly.
approximately 1 o'clock. Okay. Give or take 5 minutes. Could you speak to how we as a collective should be looking at the governor's budget as an indicator for what might be coming? How seriously should we take it? What are sort of the look fors? What does it mean for us in all actuality?
Well, you know, there is a joke floating around in Olympia. You may have heard it, that the governor's budget is dead on arrival, or the joke is, you know, the sooner he does it, the sooner we can ignore it. And that's an inside Olympia legislative joke, because what it really means is never does the legislature take the governor's budget and enact it as it is. And in fact, part of the joke is that it would not work. The governor knows that the governor's budget tends to be aspirational, as opposed to a perfectly functioning document, or for perfectly functioning budget. That's very different than the budget they will end up passing. That does not make it unimportant. It's very important. You know, in fact, if something's aspirational for the governor and you're in it, that is a great place to be. You want to keep that momentum going. If you, by the same token, if something you want is not in the governor's budget, that's when you basically start getting on the bandwagon that his thing is just, you know, it's just pie in the sky, or whatever you want to say, and that really he can't do everything, or he didn't, you know, the fact that he didn't get to this doesn't mean that he doesn't want it. It just means that he, you know, he's trying to do other things. His focus was housing this year. His focus was environmental stuff. It's important, but it's not this positive. I don't know how much I'm being helpful. It's a PR thing for us. If he puts it in, that's a great place to be, and we act as if it's set in stone. If he doesn't put it in, we act as if it doesn't matter, and we keep going forward, is basically the short answer.
Nice, thanks.
But it is nice to get that stuff in there. And we do differentiate, because we have, unlike something, we have a separately elected state officer at the head of this whole system. Whatever you may think of that, you know, that's what we have. So for the governor to put in language for DSHS is pretty dispositive. For the governor to put in language for OSPI in schools, pretty advisory.
Nice. That's great. Thanks for that feedback. I don't see any additional questions for you specifically, Mike, but maybe just a couple more minutes. You might be able to inform anything that might pop up. David had a comment in the chat. Some of you may see. Essentially, I would say, David, your recommendations have a one-on-one conversation by phone or in person, as opposed to putting detailed communication in writing. I mean, generally speaking, that's a good practice for any of us, public servants, and also locally elected officials yourself. So anything else you wanted to add to that, David?
Just that I've had experiences in the past where we had had a message to a legislator that included other members of a board, and one of the members of the board wanted to do something differently, and in their reply chose to reply to everybody, including the legislator. So then, you know, we're showing disagreement in ourselves instead of coming to the legislator with a, you know, unified position. So.
Yeah. Oopsie doodles. How many times did you learn that lesson?
That person learned it very quickly, but I've seen it repeated by others.
I used to, I had a former boss who had a sign in her office that said, I like to make the same mistake 6 or 7 times just to be sure. As it relates to communication in writing, public records, and engaging with our legislators, that we should only learn that once. So thanks for the benefit of your example. So that maybe the rest don't do the same. I promised you all that I would show you how to access our Bill Watch, and that's why this is important. A lot of the information that Mike and I share, sort of high level, in detail, relevant to any sector, if you're interested in following bills in a variety of spaces. But again, just for you to all know that you don't have to know all of this in the back of your head or by memorization. You can always come to us with questions, and we can navigate a lot of this work for you. That's really one of my primary roles. You've heard me say it before, but I think of myself as your concierge to the legislative process. And so If you forget any of this, please do not hesitate to reach out to me to ask questions. I went to the legislature online. I meant to take you to WSSDA. So we will be tracking bills as they are pre-filed. I haven't updated them yet. So there have been some bills that have been pre-filed already that I have not added to this list. It's on my to-do list for the end of this week. If you go to legislative updates, so this is WSSDA's main page under strategic advocacy, legislative updates, you'll go to bill tracker. And the bills that are currently listed there are all the bills that were still in play related to education at the end of last session. So they are still in play. And as we see the cutoff dates progress, we will remove any that don't show promise of moving forward, but some of them will. Several bills we've heard that will persist through this next session. Isolation and restraint is one of the primary bills that we've heard will return and continue for some conversation. We also know that there will be another isolation and restraint bill coming from the Senate side that will not be a companion, from what I understand. It will be potentially different. And so that'll be interesting to see how that progresses. We'll have to see bill language in order to know how as an organization we weigh in. So I just use that as one specific example to kind of illuminate how we have to really treat each bill separately, but we'll track both isolation and restraint bills as they align with or not our member adopted positions. Anyway, so you've got quite the list here. We will have that updated before session begins and maybe even before we break for the holidays. One thing I might recommend, some folks have just trouble finding it. Depending on if you're a Mac or PC user, you can bookmark these things, and I just showed you how not to do that. But I would recommend that you bookmark it if you think that you are going to come to this frequently. Under bookmarks, add to the list. This is a Mac, so you might have a different user experience, but it's a nice place for you to go if you're trying to find something quickly. Let's see. I think people are popping up because they have other meetings. Just a couple other things to note. There are three, besides bill tracker, there are three primary ways with WSSDA that you can stay in the loop as to what's going on with legislative session. First and foremost, please sign up for In Session, and you can do that by clicking on legislative updates. This is just the general page, and you can click on this link here and enter your information. You will receive then the Friday In Session, which is the publication that comes out at the end of the week, basically saying, here were the bills that we heard this week and how we weighed in. Here's the schedule for next week and what our potential positions will be on those bills. And then we might highlight some issue specific areas depending on what's progressing during the legislative session. So please sign up for In Session if you haven't already. In addition, we will also be continuing what you may have be aware of is called the networking hour. So that's the noon meetings, the noon webinars on Thursday. We will continue those in session, but we are rebranding them so they are really evidently session specific. And so when those are posted, let's just look at networking hour here. We're working on changing this. This will be reshaped and it will be called In Session Live. So you've got the In Session publication every Friday, and then you'll have In Session Live, which will be Thursdays at noon. And that will happen every week during the legislative session. Those are not recorded. However, there will be an agenda with hyperlinks that we will make accessible on this website that you can pull from the website. And some of it will be easy to understand, and where you have questions, you can just ask me. And then last but not least, we will be having this LegRep network meeting every Monday from 5:30 to 6:30 during the legislative session so that we can do some deeper dives on policy specific issues. So I would invite you to attend those so you can stay more deeply in the loop, ask more questions. It's a space for LegReps because we know y'all are interested in learning, maybe even nerding out a little bit on the legislative process while it's going on. So that's all we have for you tonight. And thanks for being here tonight, everybody, and for all the work you do.